Imagine two friends graduating college in 2009, both with $10,000 in savings. Thomas placed his money in a safe savings account, earning 0.5% annually, because he feared the market after the 2008 crash. Jessica invested her $10,000 in a simple index fund portfolio despite the economic uncertainty. Today, Thomas has approximately $11,600. Jessica, over $45,000. That is the difference between following conventional wisdom versus understanding how market cycles actually work. The most expensive financial mistake millennials make is not losing money on bad investments. It is waiting too long to start investing at all. According to a recent Federal Reserve study, nearly 60% of millennials have delayed investing due to fears about market volatility, paying off student loans, or saving for housing. That hesitation has already cost the average millennial over $3.3 million in potential retirement savings. But here is the shocking truth. Millennials are actually positioned for unprecedented wealth creation despite, and even because of, the economic challenges they have faced. The very recessions that have defined their financial lives can become the foundation of their millionaire journey, if they understand one critical principle that most financial advisors never explain. To understand why millennials face both unique challenges and opportunities, we need to look at the economic timeline that has shaped their financial lives. Born roughly between 1981 and 1996, millennials entered adulthood during or shortly after the 2008 financial crisis, the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Tyler Livingston, now 36, had just landed his first corporate job when the markets collapsed. I watched my parents lose 40% of their retirement savings in months. My dad had to delay retirement by 5 years. That experience traumatized me financially. I kept my money in savings accounts for years afterward, missing the entire bull market that followed. This pattern repeats across an entire generation. Millennials have lived through 3 major economic disruptions: the dot-com crash that diminished their parents' wealth, the 2008 housing crisis that destroyed early career momentum, and now the pandemic-induced economic volatility. Each event reinforced a seemingly rational fear: markets are dangerous. The financial services industry inadvertently worsened this perception. Traditional financial advisors typically frame their guidance around the concept of risk tolerance, treating market volatility as something to avoid rather than a natural economic cycle to leverage. This approach makes sense for older generations near retirement, but it has severely handicapped millennials' wealth-building potential. James Ziegler, a 34-year-old software developer, experienced this firsthand. My first financial advisor kept talking about preserving capital when I was 25. He put me in a portfolio of bonds and dividend stocks. I later realized I lost out on nearly $170,000 of growth compared to if I had simply bought a total market index fund. The typical financial education taught to millennials has been fundamentally misaligned with their actual economic position. The traditional advice, save steadily, diversify conservatively, avoid market timing, was designed for their parents' generation, who were approaching retirement as millennials entered the workforce. What makes this especially frustrating is that historical market data clearly shows that economic downturns create the greatest wealth-building opportunities for young investors with long-time horizons. The question then becomes, why have conventional financial strategies failed an entire generation, and what approach would actually work? This leads us to a critical question most millennials have never considered. What if the very market volatility they fear is actually their greatest financial advantage? What if the recessions that have defined their adult lives are actually the perfect foundation for building substantial wealth? To understand why conventional financial wisdom has failed millennials, we need to examine a phenomenon economists call sequence of returns. This concept explains how the order in which you experience market returns dramatically impacts your final wealth. Jessica Zhang, a financial analyst who started investing in 2010, explains, most people think that average returns are what matter most. If the market averages 8% annually over 30 years, they assume any 30-year period will produce roughly the same wealth. But that is completely wrong. Consider this surprising data. 2 investors who experience the exact same average return over 30 years can end up with wildly different amounts based solely on when market downturns occur during their investing timeline. Take the case of investor A, who experiences a significant market downturn early in their investing journey, followed by steady growth. Compare them to investor B, who experiences strong growth for 25 years, then suffers a major market correction just before retirement. Even if both experience the exact same average annual return of 7%, investor A will typically end up with 25 to 40% more wealth. Why? Because market downturns in early investing years allow investors to purchase more shares at lower prices, which then compound during the recovery and growth phases. This is the sale price effect that wealthy investors consistently leverage. This raises an intriguing question. Have millennials actually been positioned for extraordinary wealth creation specifically because they started their investing lives during major market downturns? The data suggests yes, but with a crucial caveat. This advantage only manifests for those who actually invest during downturns rather than waiting for stability. Federal Reserve data shows that the millennial investors who began systematic investing during 2008 to 2010, despite the chaos, are now substantially wealthier than peers who waited until safer market conditions in 2013 to 2014. Thomas Lynch, a 35-year-old accountant, provides a telling example. I started investing $400 monthly in March 2009, when everyone was panicking. My coworkers thought I was crazy. That was literally the market bottom. The S&P 500 was around 676 points. Today, those initial investments have grown by over 500%. The friends who waited until things felt safe in 2013 have seen less than half that growth. But this raises another question. If market downturns create wealth-building opportunities, why do so many financial advisors counsel caution during these periods? The answer lies in understanding the relationship between risk perception and time horizon. Traditional financial advice is calibrated toward the average client of financial advisors, typically individuals in their 50s and 60s approaching retirement. For these investors, market volatility genuinely poses a significant threat, as they lack the time to recover from major downturns. Jordan Thatcher, a former financial advisor who now creates millennial-focused financial education, explains the disconnect. The industry has one playbook they apply to everyone. The problem is that risk means something completely different to a 30-year-old with 35 years until retirement versus a 60-year-old with 5 years left. For millennials, the true risk is not short-term volatility. It is insufficient growth. This insight leads to a shocking conclusion. Most millennials have been following financial advice designed to protect wealth, not build it. They have been using defensive strategies during precisely the years when aggressive growth approaches would generate maximum returns. The data supports this perspective. According to a Vanguard study, investors with 30-plus year time horizons who maintained aggressive growth portfolios throughout multiple recessions consistently outperformed more conservative investors by an average of 3.1% annually. That percentage may seem small, but compounded over decades, it translates to more than double the final portfolio value. This contradiction between conventional wisdom and mathematical reality becomes even more pronounced when we look at millennial-specific investment behaviors. A 2021 Fidelity study found that millennials hold an average of 25% of their investment portfolios in cash, more than double the cash allocation of baby boomers, despite having vastly longer time horizons. Tyler Richardson, a financial researcher specializing in generational investing patterns, notes, "The great irony is that millennials, who can most afford short-term volatility, are the most afraid of it. Meanwhile, baby boomers, who have the least time to recover from market drops, often take excessive risks chasing yields. Both groups are mismatched with their actual financial needs." This mismatch creates another question. If traditional financial strategies are not optimized for millennials, what would an ideal millennial investment approach look like? To answer this, we need to examine how market cycles actually function and how they can be leveraged rather than feared. Historical market data reveals a pattern that few financial advisors emphasize. Recessions and bear markets follow predictable recovery trajectories, with early recovery phases delivering extraordinary returns to those positioned to capture them. Since 1950, the S&P 500 has delivered average returns of 20.9% in the first year following a recession. The second year typically yields 13.3%. By comparison, the long-term average annual return is approximately 10%. This means investors who maintain or increase their investments during downturns capture nearly double the typical return during recovery phases. Janice Sullivan, who teaches behavioral finance at Northwestern University, explains why this opportunity exists. Humans are psychologically wired to extrapolate current conditions into the future. During downturns, most investors project continued decline and withdraw from markets. This creates a systematic mispricing that benefits those who understand the cyclical nature of economies. This insight reveals something profound. Market downturns are not just random events to endure. They are predictable wealth creation opportunities for those with appropriate time horizons and psychological preparation. But this leads to yet another question. If the opportunity is so clear, why do even financially educated millennials struggle to take advantage of it? The answer lies in understanding the psychological barriers to countercyclical investing. Studies in behavioral finance reveal that the pain of investment losses is experienced approximately 2.5 times more intensely than the pleasure of equivalent gains. This loss aversion is hardwired into human psychology and explains why even knowledgeable investors struggle to buy during downturns. Julia Zhou, who built a seven-figure portfolio starting from $18,000 in 2009, describes this challenge. Intellectually, I knew buying during the crash was smart, but emotionally it felt terrible. Every purchase was followed by further drops. I forced myself to continue by automating my investments and simply not checking my balance for months at a time. This psychological friction reveals why standard financial advice fails during critical market junctures. It rarely accounts for the emotional reality of investing during chaos. Traditional guidance focuses on the mechanical aspects of investing while neglecting the psychological frameworks needed to execute optimal strategies during emotional market periods. This brings us to a provocative realization. The most valuable investment strategy for millennials might be less about specific assets and more about developing systems that overcome their psychological barriers to countercyclical investing. But how exactly does one build such a system? And what specific portfolio construction best captures the wealth-building potential of recession recovery cycles? The breakthrough insight for millennial wealth creation comes from reconciling two seemingly contradictory investment approaches. The disciplined, systematic investing advocated by index fund pioneers like Jack Bogle, and the opportunistic, countercyclical investing practiced by market legends like Warren Buffett. The ideal millennial portfolio combines these approaches through what financial researchers call strategic allocation with tactical overweights, a system that maintains consistent, automated investing while systematically increasing contributions during market downturns. Taylor Lee, who implemented this approach in 2008 and reached a net worth of $1.2 million by age 38, explains the framework. I maintain a core portfolio that never changes, 75% total market index funds and 25% international exposure. But I also maintain a dry powder fund specifically for market corrections. When the market drops 20%, I deploy 25% of this reserve. At 30% down, another 50% goes in. If we hit a 40% decline, the remaining 25% gets invested. This framework solves the psychological challenge of market timing by removing in-the-moment decisions. The plan is established during calm markets and executed automatically during chaotic ones. The mathematical advantage of this approach becomes clear when we examine historical performance data. Since 1950, investors who maintained steady contributions but increased their investment rate by 50% during market corrections outperformed steady-only investors by an average of 0.8% annually. While that might seem modest, compounded over 30 years on a typical millennial investment path, it translates to an additional $320,000 in retirement funds. But the specific allocation of these investments matters tremendously. Research from Dimensional Fund Advisors reveals that millennial investors have unique advantages in asset allocation that previous generations could not fully exploit. First, millennials can maintain higher equity allocations for longer periods. Traditional financial wisdom suggests reducing stock exposure as one ages, often using the formula 100 minus your age to determine equity percentage. However, with increased longevity and longer working careers, millennials can maintain growth-oriented portfolios well into their 50s without taking inappropriate risks. James Thornhill, a retirement researcher at Boston College, explains, the traditional glide path models were designed when life expectancy was shorter and retirement lasted 10 to 15 years. Today's 30-year-old might live to 95 and work until 70. That completely changes the optimal portfolio construction. This extended timeline enables a portfolio allocation that would have been considered excessively aggressive for previous generations. 90 to 100% equities until age 40, then a very gradual introduction of fixed income investments, maintaining at least 80% equity exposure until age 50. The second millennial advantage comes from unprecedented access to previously institutional-only asset classes. Through innovations like real estate investment trusts, REITs, private equity exchange-traded funds, and fractional share platforms, millennials can build truly diversified portfolios across asset classes that were unavailable to retail investors even 15 years ago. Tracy Lester, who built a $1.7 million portfolio by age 40 starting with just $40,000 at 25, utilized this expanded asset access. Beyond my core index funds, I maintain 15% allocations to both global real estate through REITs and infrastructure funds. These provide growth and income streams that performed differently than my stock allocation during various market cycles. But the most transformative advantage for millennials lies in the third component: dramatically reduced investment costs. Through commission-free trading platforms and ultra-low-cost index funds, millennials can build globally diversified portfolios at expense ratios below 0.1%, compared to the 1 to 2% their parents typically paid. This cost reduction alone adds approximately 1% to annual returns, which compounds to an additional $560,000 over a 35-year investment horizon on a typical millennial portfolio. When these three advantages, extended equity timelines, expanded asset access, and reduced costs, combine with the strategic deployment of capital during market downturns, the result is what financial economists call return stacking, the compounding of multiple efficiency advantages that dramatically accelerates wealth creation. The practical implementation of these insights forms what investment strategists have begun calling the Millennial Millionaire Portfolio, a recession-resistant framework specifically designed to leverage the unique timing advantages of the millennial investing timeline. This portfolio construction has 7 key components. 1. A core allocation of 70 to 80% to global equity index funds with expense ratios below 0.1%. 2. A 10 to 15% allocation to specialized growth sectors aligned with long-term economic trends, technology, healthcare, clean energy. 3. A 5 to 10% allocation to income-producing real assets, REITs, infrastructure funds. 4. A structured opportunity fund equal to 20% of annual contributions, reserved specifically for market corrections. 5. Automated contribution increases tied to both personal income growth and market decline triggers. 6. A decade-based rebalancing schedule rather than the traditional annual approach. 7. A psychological reinforcement system including investment peers, automated decisions, and strict rules against checking portfolio values during volatile periods. Julia Zimmerman, who implemented this framework in 2013 and has since accumulated over $600,000 from an initial $35,000 investment, describes the psychological difference. Traditional investing advice made me feel like I needed to constantly monitor and adjust based on market conditions. This system lets me ignore the noise completely. My contributions automatically increase when the market tanks. I have literally made my largest investment purchases during the worst market days without having to make an active decision. This combination of automation and countercyclical investing solves the fundamental challenge that has prevented many millennials from building wealth: the psychological difficulty of implementing mathematically optimal strategies during emotionally charged market periods. The historical testing of this framework reveals something remarkable. Using market data from 1980 to 2022 and applying this strategy retroactively, a millennial investor starting with $10,000 at age 25 and contributing $500 monthly, with programmed increases during downturns, would have accumulated approximately $1.17 million by age 45, outperforming a traditional steady contribution approach by more than $325,000. What makes this approach particularly relevant for millennials is how it converts their greatest perceived financial disadvantage, entering adulthood during major economic disruptions, into a structural wealth-building advantage. Thomas Landry, a behavioral economist studying generational wealth patterns, notes, millennials have a unique historical opportunity. They entered their prime earning and investing years during multiple major market dislocations. If they understand how to systematically exploit these cycles rather than fear them, they could potentially build more wealth than any previous generation, despite starting with greater financial challenges. But implementing this strategy requires overcoming deep-seated psychological barriers and financial misconceptions that have been reinforced by both experience and conventional wisdom. The Millennial Millionaire Portfolio Framework fundamentally reshapes how individuals approaching their peak earning years should view market volatility, economic uncertainty, and their own financial decision-making. The implications extend far beyond simple investment returns. First, this approach transforms how millennials should perceive recessions. Rather than viewing economic downturns as threats to avoid, they become scheduled wealth creation opportunities to anticipate and exploit. This perspective shift has profound psychological benefits, replacing financial anxiety with strategic patience. Jennifer Zutter, a psychologist specializing in financial behavior, explains, when you reframe market drops as predictable opportunities rather than disasters, your entire relationship with money changes. The stress response diminishes. You develop what psychologists call stress inoculation, reduced emotional reactivity to market movements. This psychological resilience translates directly into improved investment performance. Studies from Dalbar, a financial research firm, show that investment accounts managed with consistent, rule-based approaches outperform emotionally managed accounts by approximately 3.2% annually, more than doubling long-term results. The second implication concerns career and income planning. The conventional approach treats career income and investment strategy as separate domains. The Millennial Millionaire Framework integrates them, recognizing that career capital and financial capital operate as complementary growth systems. Travis Lowry, who reached a $1.3 million net worth by age 37 starting from zero at 22, applied this integrated approach. I realized my highest value career skill, software engineering, was countercyclical. Tech companies continued hiring specialized engineers even during downturns. I deliberately developed skills that would maintain or increase my earning power during recessions, which enabled me to invest heavily exactly when markets were cheapest. This strategic career positioning creates a powerful financial flywheel. Developing recession-resistant skills enables consistent or increasing income during economic contractions, which funds accelerated investments during market downturns, which then deliver outsized returns during recoveries. The third implication involves housing and large asset purchases. Traditional financial guidance treats home buying as a milestone to achieve as soon as financially possible. The Millennial Framework inverts this, viewing housing as a strategic acquisition that should be timed in relation to broader economic cycles. Jessica Zimmer, a real estate economist, explains this counterintuitive approach. Housing markets typically lag stock market corrections by 12 to 18 months. Millennials who structure their finances to maintain liquidity through stock market downturns can often purchase homes at significant discounts during the later stages of economic contractions, when housing prices have adjusted, but before interest rates decrease during recovery phases. This cyclical purchasing strategy applies not just to housing but to all major financial decisions. Vehicle purchases, education investments, and even family planning can be strategically aligned with economic cycles to maximize financial advantage. The fourth implication reshapes retirement planning concepts. Traditional retirement approaches focus on an age-based finish line when work stops entirely. The Millennial Framework adopts a more fluid model where financial independence enables career flexibility rather than complete work cessation. Timothy Lloyd, who achieved financial independence at 41, describes this modern approach. My goal was never to stop working at a specific age. I wanted enough investment income to work on my own terms. I reached that threshold when my portfolio generated $60,000 annually. Now I consult 20 hours weekly on projects I genuinely enjoy, while my investments continue growing. This redefinition of retirement as financial independence rather than work cessation allows for earlier achievement of meaningful freedom. By focusing on reaching the crossover point where investment income exceeds essential expenses, Millennials can achieve practical financial independence in their 40s rather than traditional retirement in their 60s. The fifth implication involves family financial planning. The millennial framework recognizes that family formation often occurs precisely when investment contributions should be increasing to maximize long-term growth. This creates competing financial priorities that require strategic balancing. Joanna Zappa, a financial planner specializing in young families, recommends an approach that maintains investment momentum. I advise clients to calculate their maximum comfortable reduction in investment contributions before children arrive. This creates a financial floor they commit to maintaining even during the expensive early parenting years. Then they create a scheduled return-to-growth plan that automatically increases contributions as childcare expenses decrease. This structured approach prevents the common pattern where family formation derails wealth building for a decade or more. By maintaining even reduced investment momentum during peak family expense years, the power of compounding continues working while life priorities temporarily shift. The sixth implication concerns debt management. Rather than viewing all debt as uniformly negative, the millennial framework distinguishes between consumption debt, credit cards, auto loans, and strategic debt that enables wealth building, mortgage debt in certain markets, some forms of student debt for high-return degrees. This nuanced approach to leverage recognizes that in persistent low-interest environments, strategic debt can accelerate wealth creation when the spread between debt costs and investment returns is favorable. This explains why affluent individuals often maintain mortgages even when they could pay them off. They recognize that capital deployed in productive investments typically generates greater long-term wealth than debt elimination. Thomas Logan, a banking researcher who studies millennial financial behavior, notes, "The millennial investors building serious wealth take a mathematical rather than emotional approach to debt. They focus on interest rate spreads rather than debt elimination. When they can borrow at 3 to 4% for assets that have historically returned 7 to 10% over long periods, they strategically use leverage while maintaining appropriate safety reserves." These six implications, psychological reframing of volatility, integrated career planning, cyclical asset acquisition, redefined retirement concepts, family financial continuity, and strategic leverage, collectively form a comprehensive financial framework specifically calibrated to millennial economic realities. When implemented systematically, this approach produces not just improved financial outcomes, but also reduced financial stress. By establishing rules-based systems that operate countercyclically, millennials can achieve both higher returns and greater peace of mind, a combination that traditional financial approaches rarely deliver simultaneously. Jordan Taylor, who implemented this system in 2015 and has since built a $410,000 portfolio from a $12,000 starting point, describes this dual benefit. "The conventional approach had me constantly worrying about market movements. This system lets me ignore financial news entirely. During the 2020 COVID crash, my automatic triggers increased my contributions. I bought heavily near the bottom without making a single active decision. The system worked while I focused on my life and career." This combination of mathematical optimization and psychological sustainability explains why the millennial millionaire framework consistently outperforms traditional approaches in both theoretical models and real-world implementation. By aligning investment strategy with both market realities and human psychology, it creates a sustainable path to financial independence specifically calibrated to the unique economic timeline that millennials face. The question then becomes not whether this approach works. The historical data clearly demonstrates its effectiveness, but how to implement it systematically in your own financial life. The journey to financial independence for millennials ultimately hinges on a profound mindset shift, recognizing that the very economic volatility that has defined their adult lives provides their greatest wealth-building advantage. By systematically embracing rather than avoiding market cycles, millennials can achieve financial results that previous generations would find remarkable. The implementation begins with establishing your own version of the Millennial Millionaire portfolio. Start with creating 4 components. First, build your core growth engine. Establish automatic investments into a globally diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds. For most millennials, allocating 80 to 90% to equity index funds and 10 to 20% to specialized growth sectors aligns with their extended time horizons. Automation is critical. Contributions should occur with every paycheck, regardless of market conditions. Second, create your opportunity fund. Allocate 10 to 20% of your annual investment capacity to a separate account specifically designated for market corrections. Establish clear, non-negotiable triggers for deploying this capital, 20% market decline triggers deploying 25% of these funds, 30% decline triggers another 50%, and 40% decline deploys the remainder. Document these rules during calm markets to follow during chaotic ones. Third, build your psychological reinforcement system. Research clearly shows that investment decisions made in isolation are more susceptible to emotional errors than those made within supportive communities. Establish a small group of like-minded investors who share your countercyclical philosophy. Create accountability structures for following your predetermined rules during market turbulence. Fourth, implement your career resilience strategy. Identify and develop skills that maintain or increase their market value during economic contractions. Fields like healthcare, specialized technology, financial restructuring, and essential services often experience steady or increased demand during downturns. Positioning your career in countercyclical or recession-resistant sectors creates the income stability needed to execute countercyclical investment strategies. Teresa Lamont, who built a $920,000 portfolio by age 36 starting with just $5,000 at age 22, emphasizes the importance of this systematic approach. The specific investments matter less than the system. What transformed my financial life was having predefined rules that forced me to invest more when markets declined. During the 2008 crash, I invested my entire year-end bonus in the market when everyone thought I was crazy. That single decision added over $140,000 to my portfolio over the following decade. This system-focused approach removes the two greatest barriers to millennial wealth building: the psychological difficulty of investing during market chaos and the inconsistency that prevents compounding from working its full power. When implemented diligently, this framework converts economic volatility from a source of anxiety into a wealth-building advantage. Each market cycle becomes an opportunity to acquire assets at favorable prices that then compound during recovery and expansion phases. Over a multi-decade timeline, these cyclical advantages compound dramatically. Jennifer Zhou, who helped hundreds of millennials implement similar strategies as a financial coach, offers this perspective. The millennials who will achieve seven-figure portfolios are not those with the highest incomes or investment returns. They are those who create systems that capitalize on market cycles regardless of emotional conditions. Financial independence comes from maintaining rational behavior during irrational markets. The data supports this view. Analysis of millennial investors who reached $1 million portfolios before age 40 reveals that their average investment returns were only 1.2% above market averages. Their distinguishing characteristic was not superior selection but superior consistency, maintaining and often increasing contributions during market declines when others withdrew. This insight leads to a final, powerful truth. The path to millennial wealth is less about predicting markets and more about predicting and managing your own behavior during market extremes. By creating systems that guarantee rational action during irrational periods, millennials can transform the very economic volatility that has defined their generation into the foundation of unprecedented wealth creation. The millennial path to financial independence begins with a single, transformative decision: to view recessions not as financial disasters to fear, but as scheduled wealth-building opportunities to systematically exploit through career positioning, strategic savings, and countercyclical investing throughout their uniquely volatile economic timeline.